Hello and welcome to Birth Time, the podcast. Following the success of our world-renowned and international award-winning film, Birth Time, the documentary, we are coming back together to explore a wide variety of topics around pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. As a way of exploring topics in great depth, we will be covering one topic over several episodes, bringing you up-to-date evidence-based information from academics, practitioners, and birth workers, as well as stories and lived experiences from birthing women and people and their families. We will also have interludes with people we interviewed in Birth Time the documentary, finding out where life has taken them since the creation of the film. Join your hosts, Homebirth midwife Jo Hunter, doula and birth photographer Jerusha Sutton, and occasionally producer and shamanic practitioner Zoe Naylor, as we delve deep into the world of growing and birthing babies. Welcome back to Birth Time, the podcast. This is the first episode in our series 2. We've just wrapped up our birth trauma series, and we're now moving into series 2, which we are calling Who Defines Risk? Jo Hunter is here with me, my darling co-host.
Hello,
Jo, tell us about our discussions around this topic.
Yeah, so I think we kind of decided that we might go along the lines of this topic because of the recent happenings in the world of home birth in Australia around professional indemnity insurance for privately practicing midwives and the potential parameters that they'll have to practice within, we will have to practice within. So categories of risk are being discussed, thrown about by all sorts of people, but as yet nothing is really set in stone. And I think Hannah touched on that in her interview last week. So this got us thinking about risk. So we thought, let's do a series on it: low risk, medium risk, high risk, what it means to different people, what it means to different professions and the practitioners within those professions, who gets to define it, whose risk is it anyway, and who gets to choose what's too risky. And does this potentially violate human rights as well as ethical practice guidelines? Because we know that, women have the right to decline and the right to informed consent, and yet if they're being told that they can't do certain things because of risk, then this is actually shitting all over those guidelines. So there's really so much involved in it, and I'm really excited about all the different people we're going to speak to in this series about it. But it certainly doesn't fit into a nice little package of categories.
No, this is so true. I always think back when we talk about risk, I always think back, one of those formative experiences when I was a very early doula. This was 16 years ago. One of my dear friends was pregnant with identical twins, and I went to a late appointment with her at the hospital when she was maybe 39 weeks. She'd been trying to be pressured into induction for weeks at that point and kept declining. And, this doctor called her incredibly selfish and said, you have a 5% chance here of twin-to-twin transfusion. And she just said straight back, but what about the 95% chance that I don't? And it landed in a way of it is that perception of risk of who defines it, who is it important to, and whose decision is it? It's such a massive topic, and we come across it obviously all the time in birth, how we pose risk, how we speak about it. I also think about Sarah Wickham saying, what if we use the word chance instead of the word risk? So yeah, it's going to be a big topic.
Yeah, it definitely seems that authoritative knowledge, so when we talk about that, it's the knowledge of the people in authority. And in our maternity system, obviously, that is obstetricians. They're at the top of the hierarchy. So their knowledge seems to have more value in our system than anyone else's has, and particularly the woman herself. So within the culture, it's the practitioners who determine and define risk, right?
Right.
Which can get really tricky because obviously women understand their own bodies and know their babies better than anybody else does. And, particularly as a home birth midwife of 16 years, I know that women, birthing people and their families, choose this model of care for many reasons. But one of the biggest reasons I really believe is to maintain their autonomy and they have their right to choose and their right to decline. So stuffing women choosing to birth at home with a private midwife into a box of categories labelled with different levels of risk, it's just not going to work. It's not going to cut it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and I can't wait to talk to everyone about it.
Quite. Well, and so that takes us to our first guest on this series. We have Kristyn Begnell joining us today. Kristyn is a mother of 2 young girls living in Darug and Gundungurra country in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. After researching different models of care, Kristyn planned a home birth with a privately practicing midwife for her first child, but transferred to hospital at 37 weeks due to medical complications unrelated to pregnancy. She describes her birth experience in a public hospital as traumatic. Kristyn saw the same midwife during her second and third pregnancies and had a successful home birth after caesarean in 2018. This experience propelled her into maternity advocacy, particularly home birth advocacy, when she became a consumer representative for her local publicly funded home birth program and joined Homebirth New South Wales, which was then Homebirth Access Sydney, in 2018. She has since become a consumer representative for the Australian College of Midwives, the Bureau of Health Information, the New South Wales Ministry of Health, the Agency of Clinical Innovation, the LEAP guidelines, her local health district, and has been the coordinator of Homebirth Australia since 2021. Kristyn testified in the recent New South Wales birth trauma inquiry as a consumer and a representative of Homebirth Australia. Kristyn, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's so great to have you here with your big basket of knowledge that you carry with you.
Thank you, guys. It's good to be here.
I guess firstly, what I'd really love to hear, Kristyn, is, you've obviously been really heavily involved in lobbying and advocacy as a consumer home birth consumer activist for lots of years. So we would really love for you to share us a little bit of background, what inspired or motivated you to take on this role?
Yeah. So it was after the birth of my second daughter that I actually got stuck into advocacy work and volunteering. I sort of dipped my toes in it a little bit after my home birth transfer because I knew people from playgroup and stuff who were involved with Homebirth Access Sydney, which is now Homebirth New South Wales. So I got asked to join, and I did, and then I ducked out because I was having sort of, this crisis of belonging, which I think is pretty common for home birth transfer mums. You don't really feel like you belong with the, hospital birthing mums group that they sort of put you in after you have your baby. And I didn't really feel like I could identify as a home birther either. I think if I could have my time again, I would think differently now. But so after I had my second baby at home, I was going to the regular meetups that my midwife and her sort of group of midwives were having every month. And that was the highlight of my month, meeting with the midwives and all the other mums and babies and, chatting about our births. And my midwife said there was a need for a consumer on the local publicly funded home birth program. So she put my name forward for that, and I've been doing it ever since.
Amazing. That's so good. I think, it's interesting that, women who home birth, and particularly the women that get involved in advocacy roles, they often get involved with, the system, roles that are within the system rather than actually outside the system, which is, the private midwife home birth roles. And, what I've found and what we know is over the years, all of the positive changes that have happened within the system have all come from the home birth model of care. Back in the 70s, men and partners weren't allowed in the birth room, and certainly children weren't, and water birth wasn't a thing. And all of those changes that have happened over the years and right up to continuity of midwifery care have all come from the home birth model of care. I mean, even when I was having my babies, 23 years ago, to 28 years ago, the only way you could get continuity of midwifery care was to hire a private midwife. There was none in any hospital setting anywhere. So there's been huge changes that have happened within the system as a result of home birth, really. So, yeah, I guess what I wanted to touch on was what Homebirth Australia, your role in Homebirth Australia now as the national convener of Homebirth Australia, and you guys are working so hard behind the scenes around this whole professional indemnity crisis that we're having at the moment. So what's happened is, up until this point, privately practicing midwives lost we didn't have insurance. Okay, there was no insurance for intrapartum care back in 2009. I mean, I obviously I used to be in your role. That was my job before I became a midwife, and I was very involved in advocacy and lobbying as well. And at the time, national registration came in, which meant that if I wanted to register in another state, before that, if I wanted to register in another state, I would have to re-register in that state. We only had state-based registration, and then national registration became a thing, and with it became the need for every health practitioner to have professional indemnity insurance. And there wasn't any for home birth midwives, right? Which is when we organised that huge rally where 3,000 people came, and Nicola Roxon was the health minister at the time. And overnight she gave us an exemption from needing to have the insurance. So what happened from there? So that was 2009. We all had an exemption from needing to have it. We still had antenatal and postnatal insurance, but we didn't have any intrapartum insurance, and that meant that we were exempt from needing to have it, but there was a whole heap of things that we had to do in order to be eligible for the exemption. Yeah. Okay. So now here we are 15, 16 years later. What's happened in that time, and how have we got here?
I just want to say about the rally, first off, of course, I'd heard about it. It was like a momentous thing in home birth history in this country, that rally. And while I was building the background document for this issue for us to take to MPs in Canberra a couple of weeks ago, I stumbled across a bunch of videos on YouTube of the rally and the speeches, and it was just amazing. I watched it all because I have a feeling something like that might be needed again in the future. But yeah, it was a huge thing. Pre-social media, well, really, I think it was kind of pre-Instagram at least. And since then, the exemption has been extended multiple times. So usually the exemption will last for a period of 1 to 2 years, and then getting towards the end of the extension period, the home birth groups would start to lobby government for another extension because no insurance product was available. And that's kind of been the cycle for the last, 15 years or so, until now, obviously. So the Labor government extended the exemption in July last year for another 12 months, which they kind of beat us to the punch last year. Normally, we're the ones writing to them when we hit, 10 months till the exemption runs out, because we know that women and midwives are planning 9 months ahead or more. But this time, it was kind of a lull in our advocacy because we were in the middle of an exemption period and they announced an extension. Nice surprise for us. But we now know that the timing of that to run out in July next year is when they want to implement this new insurance product. So,
and the May women are ringing, right?
Oh yeah.
I've had phone calls from women that are due in May next year. So we're talking. We've got like 6 weeks to get this across the line. Yeah, exactly.
And so it's kind of the chief nurse midwife did say back in June at Senate estimates, and that video has been it did the rounds on social media. She said they wanted to have all the details wrapped up for this new product by December to allow time for women and midwives to plan, but, you know, there will be women falling pregnant now and until the end of the year who are going to be in limbo, not knowing where they can birth or who they can have as their care provider. So it's really not an ideal situation. And also the speed with which they're trying to rush it through has us worried, because we think they've already done one round of consultation and it wasn't very thorough. It wasn't public. So they had 250 submissions, but, you know, there's many, many more women and midwives who would like to have a say in this product, stakeholders who are directly impacted. And we just, you know, that's why we've been pushing so hard, because we want them to hear our concerns loud and clear, because if we don't tell them, they're not going to ask and they're not going to get the full picture of how it's going to impact everyone.
So that seems quite tactical, doesn't it? That they've given such a short run up at it and that they've put it under quite a tight time frame.
Yeah, I'm sure it has a lot to do with the election cycle and things like that. You know, the Labor Party were, like Jo mentioned, the ones in government when this whole issue first started. And they're in government again now. And it just felt like no one really knew. We knew that an insurance product was going to come around one day, but we didn't realise the government had been having detailed discussions with insurance companies in confidence, like it was a commercial in confidence tender process is what they've told us. So we don't know who they've been speaking to or what they spoke about. And even the Australian College of Midwives was blindsided by this announcement in the budget back in May. So, yeah, we kind of had to hit the ground running with it.
As much as obviously the Australian College of Midwives is the voice for all midwives in Australia, but really Homebirth Australia is the key organisation for homebirth. It's the peak body for homebirth, for both homebirthing women and homebirth midwives. And, you know, you guys have done so much in terms of getting, you know, speaking to the public and asking what it is that they want, not just sort of running with what you guys think everybody wants. You know, you've done this amazing survey, but prior to the survey, you did a call with 100 homebirth midwives around Australia just to discuss this and actually get to the bottom of what we're all thinking and what we're all hoping. So can you just talk a little bit to that? Obviously there was this survey that you put together. Maybe just talk about how you got the questions together first, and then who responded to it and how many, and how's it going?
Yeah, so we had a bit of an emergency meeting, our committee, when we first saw this budget announcement. You know, the government was investing money into underwriting an insurance product for low risk home birth. And of course, we're immediately concerned about the definition of low risk. Who defines it? Does the insurance company have any input into that? So we have been collaborating with other consumer groups on this from the start, because, you know, we've got our committee, but there's also Homebirth New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, and other consumer groups who've been helping us on this. And
just go ahead and name them.
I will.
Because you know, yeah.
So we've had Homebirth New South Wales, Homebirth Queensland, Homebirth Victoria, which is a fairly new group of passionate home birthers down in Vic. We've had Hygeia Health. We've had Better Births Illawarra. We've got Maternity Choices Australia, Birth Time Team, and Borne at Home Film have been helping us as well. And we've got a couple of midwives and academics on our insurance strategy team, I've been calling it. And we've also got someone reached out to us on Instagram giving us some political advice, which has been really helpful. So it's a real team effort. And we had to move quickly because with this survey, because after this video of Senate estimates was shared on socials, there was a really hard and fast response from the home birth community. Like, there was a lot of fear and a lot of anger, because this is an issue that anyone who's been in this community for a long time knows. Like I was speaking to Elaine Norling, who is one of the founders of HBA, and she's just an awesome human being. And I always give her a call when I need advice with something, because, she's our home birth elder. And she said it just feels like 1979 all over again, So it's sad that we've been fighting these same battles for decades. But she said, you can't afford to take your foot off the accelerator at all, ever. And this is just proof of that. So yeah, we strategized as a group of many different consumers and midwives to come up with these questions for the survey, because we were anticipating that there would be a consultation process and we wanted to be prepared for it. And we wanted to cover all our bases. So we asked questions for home birth midwives, for parents who've had a home birth and those planning a home birth. And
how many responses did you get to the survey?
Well, we had 1,500 in the first 24 hours, which just blew our socks off. But then we ended up with 5,917 by the end of the fortnight. And we were just still are, kind of coming to terms with that.
That's unbelievable, Kristyn.
It just goes to show, though, that this is a really important topic. It's really important for the women that are choosing home birth and for the midwives that are supporting women.
Yeah.
And people are really passionate about it. And people are reeling out there about what's going to happen. We know women choose home birth because they get to choose. That's what it's about. It's about choosing what they want, and it's about choosing. They define the risk. Really, that's how it differs from birth in the system. And to remove that right from women and from the midwives to support them is, I said in the beginning, it's just not going to cut it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. They are passionate, and just the response from home birth midwives alone was huge. We had 189 midwives do the survey, and we think there's about 200 home birth midwives in the whole country. So a really good response rate, and, such an awesome response rate from women too. They make up the vast majority of the people who filled in the survey, and they left paragraphs and paragraphs of comments and didn't hold back, just shared everything. And we're still going through all the comments. We've got an awesome team of midwife academics working on the survey, and they quickly turned around the initial report, but there's much more analysis to be done. Yeah.
And so can you give us an overview, Kristyn, of what the initial analysis was, what it told us?
Yeah. So apart from, the 189 midwives, it was a pretty even split between past home birth parents and future home birthing parents. And in the midwives section of the survey, we asked them questions about, what percentage of your client base would be considered category B and C, which are the two categories in the ACM guidelines for consultation and referral that the government is proposing they use as a tool to determine whether a woman is eligible for home birth. And between...
So category A is
yes.
low risk, category B is medium risk, and category C is high risk. That's how it's kind of spelt out.
Yeah.
And those were never, they were never, it was never the intention when they were written to use as a, to try and tell women who can birth at home and who can't.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
it's, and that was one of the questions we asked in the survey too. Do you think that the guidelines appropriately categorise risk? And 77% of the midwives said no, they don't agree. And 97% said they don't think the guidelines should be used to determine whether a woman should have a home birth or not. And the PPMs said between 71 and 80% of their client base are category B and C. So that's huge. That's, 3/4 of the women currently home birthing could potentially be risked out if this passes.
Hey there, this is Zoe Naylor from the Birth Time team. If you're new to us here at Birth Time, you might want to head to our website to learn more about our movement and mission. There you can stream the film, apply for a screening licence, invest in some Birth Time merchandise, buy a gift card, subscribe to the Hub, watch recordings of our live events, or simply share your feedback. Just head to www.birchtime.world and don't forget to follow us across social media at Birchtime World. Now it's back to the podcast.
And so just to spell that out, the government is proposing that they do have this insurance product, but they will put restrictions on, they will put parameters on who midwives are allowed, should we say, to look after. And this vast majority of women are going to be risked out. And Jo, you did your sums, didn't you, on your client base? Mm-hmm. And what did you come up with? Your percentage of women who would not qualify in these categories?
70%. Yeah.
70% of your client base would not cut the mustard here.
Yeah. And it's about it would be that we would be working outside the parameters of our registration because we wouldn't have insurance, right? So if the government are saying that they'll only insure women who fall into category A in the guidelines and won't insure us to support women who go into category B and C, then if we did support them, we would be working illegally, essentially. Yes. So, part of the things that, us having spoken to lots of midwives is that there should be, as there are in the guidelines, there should be a very clear pathway for women who choose care outside of them, and they should still be able to be supported, and we should still be able to support them because we know women will find a way regardless, and is it the women that do have higher needs that will end up birthing without a midwife, and they're the very women that probably need them more than anybody else.
Exactly.
And so what were the stats that you got on that, Kristyn?
Yeah. So 56% of the women who completed our survey, the parents who are planning a home birth, said that they would free birth if they could not access a home birth midwife legally, if they were risked out. And that's really alarming because obviously every woman who did our survey, their preference is home birth with a midwife. And free birthing as a first choice is one thing. Free birthing as a last resort is another. And we also had over 40% of these women say that they would even lie to their midwife about their medical history in order to secure a home birth, which again has its own risks and, risk of damage to the relationship, which is the one thing that makes home birth so safe and the outcomes so great, is that relationship with the woman and the midwife. So, we would have a lot of desperate women doing whatever they could to access home birth in any way that they could, whether that's lie or go it alone. And it's frightening. And I think that, all the MPs we've spoken to about these statistics are alarmed by that. But exactly what you said, Jo, we've said to them, and this is one of the main things in our asks of government is you need to have a plan for the women who are going to do it anyway, because they will, and the midwives who will care for them anyway, because they will. And that was very clear in that consultation we did with PPMs before the survey, is that it was almost unanimous that the midwives would continue to care for these women anyway, because this is what being a midwife is. And you do it now, and you care for these women now. 70% of them are category B and C. So it's safe.
And that's the thing. Existing now, Jo, you have a pathway, don't you? You have a record of understanding with women if they choose to go, to follow on that path. You have a pathway to follow that
through.
A
very clear record of understanding, and it's basically a document that we fill in with our clients. And it's around, it's about covering for the midwife, but it's also to ensure that the woman is making an informed decision. So you're giving her information, but she's also doing her own research, and we come together with that information together to make a plan of care. And it's her choice at the end of the day. It's her body, it's her baby, it's her choice. And we can't take that away. We just can't.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So what is Homebirth? So you've done the survey, and then, you guys have just been in Canberra, right?
Yeah.
Last week or the week before.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, we went to Canberra. It was about 2 weeks ago. We organised a bunch of meetings over 2 days at Parliament House. And it was great. We learned a lot. We spoke to, I don't know how many MPs off the top of my head, but we've had many Zoom meetings since. So lots and lots of emails and follow-ups. And, it was interesting that some of the MPs we met with already knew about this issue because people in their electorate had been writing to them. So midwives and women have been taking the initiative to write and meet with them and talk about this. So some of them already knew what was going on and others didn't. So there was a bit of, home birth education that we had to do, which is, we're used to it. But a lot of support is what we got from those meetings. So we didn't meet with any MPs in government on that trip, but we have since on Zoom and have been very clear with our concerns and what needs to be done. So, yeah, we're hoping that, next week or when this podcast comes out, we're going to do our next call to action, which is we want everyone to email their MPs, their federal MPs about this issue just to get it on everybody's radar, because it's clear that they really value the voices of the people in their electorate and they value personal stories as well. Like they really stick in the memory. So, yeah.
And so what are you asking for, Kristyn? What's the angle that we're going for when we're lobbying this?
Well, at the moment, us as an organisation, we're kind of waiting for the government to go through all the consultation submissions they've received and say what the next step in the process is. And when we met with them last week, they couldn't give us a timeline, couldn't give us any real concrete information, couldn't or wouldn't. So in the meantime, we know women and midwives want to do something. We get emails and messages every day from people who want to help in some way. So we just think that writing letters and then meeting with federal MPs, it doesn't matter which party they're on, we want women to tell them how these proposed changes could impact them personally, what it's going to mean for them. Tell them that you would be forced to free birth or, go back into the hospital system which traumatized you or, whatever is relevant to you. As a midwife, it might be devastating for your business. It might be the end of your midwifery career. We just want you to share your personal stories with them because it's just laying the groundwork for when this legislation comes to Parliament and there's the whole process of it being voted on and accepted, that these MPs and senators know what the impacts are going to be.
So what's Homebirth Australia hoping to achieve as the first sort of line of, what do you hope is going to happen? What are you lobbying for?
Well, first of all, we want the exemption extended again, because we just don't think it's enough time. It's December, to have everything sorted, and then July implementation is too soon to do it properly, and it needs to be done properly, or there will be women left behind. So we don't want any woman left behind. We want, if they are going to use the guidelines as a tool, they need to use them in full, which means there needs to be a pathway and that record of understanding that you mentioned before. There needs to be some kind of protection for midwives to continue to be able to care for these women and not lose their registration. And the choice needs to be there. Regardless of the woman's risk, whether she's category A, B, or C, she should still be able to choose her care provider. Like, that's a basic human right. So we are asking for them to do that or offer an all-risk insurance product which covers everybody. So
and also
exactly.
affordable, because obviously that's another whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if it, that will then, if it's very expensive, it will impact the cost of home birth as well.
And we know home birth is already so inaccessible to so many women because of availability of midwives and the cost, because there is no Medicare rebate for the intrapartum period. So, a lot of women are already unable to access it, and we don't want that pool to get even smaller.
Absolutely. Okay.
And so it's a really big moment in time, right? It feels like we're in a huge fork in the road where we have been sitting waiting for 15 years with the conditions not changing. We are at a huge point in history where what is dictated at this point might dictate the next, 15 years, right? So if we don't get this across the line in some workable way, we're going to be stuck with the conditions that have come from this. And I'm just thinking about the advocacy front. I know letter writing doesn't sound very sexy, does it? I mean, no one wants to sit and write a letter to the MP. And I know that sometimes it just feels like sending out a piece of paper into the abyss. It feels like this mystery thing that you do, and as if anyone's going to read it. But I think this is the important thing, isn't it? That we really do need to actually put the weight on that and know that these things do land, and it is an issue of volume. If they do hear enough from all of these people and in their experience, from direct personal experience, this is where we are going to make a difference. So this is where we've got to not say, what difference is my letter going to make? Or what difference is it going to make if I turn up to that rally when we end up having one? No doubt. Or whatever it is, this is one of those we really need to come together and form a powerful mass to change this.
And you think there's been 5,900 people fill in that survey. If every single one of those people wrote a letter to their MP, it could be the difference between that MP receiving one letter from somebody in their electorate or 100 letters from someone in their electorate saying the same thing. If they get 100 letters through their emails saying the same thing but from different perspectives, they've got to listen.
Yeah, and we wouldn't ask people to do it. We've been holding back. We've been really strategic about what we put out there. I mean, even though the survey, we put it together quickly, I think it was an all-nighter for me, just putting it together. And oh God, we really put a lot of effort into the wording in the questions and things like that. We've been working with our political advisor the whole way. And of course, when something new happens, like when the consultation came out, when the government emailed us 3 questions in an email to respond to, and they gave us 3 weeks to respond, we had to pivot then and change our strategy a little. And we wouldn't ask women to do it if we didn't think it was going to have an impact, because we know, especially as, parents with young babies, you don't have all the time in the world. And we fully appreciate the effort and the energy that goes into sharing your story. Like, we just had the birth trauma inquiry in New South Wales, and writing a submission for that was draining physically, emotionally. Like, it really is an effort. So we think it will have an impact, definitely, because like we said, we've had we've had a few meetings with MPs who've just had a couple of emails, and that's enough. It's going to make an impact, and we can't sit on our hands and wait. And I know we've got so many women sort of chomping at the bit in our emails and our inbox, in our DMs, just wanting to help. So we want to channel all that energy to the people who need to hear it. And then, like you said before, Jo, home birthers, we get stuff done, and it's not just stuff that benefits us, it's the whole maternity system. So this will have a flow-on effect, and really that's something we're trying to appeal to with our campaign, is that it doesn't matter if you personally would have a home birth or not. This is about choice, and that's it. If you call yourself a feminist, and if you believe that your wife or sister or daughter or granddaughter should have the right to choose where she gives birth, then this applies to you. So yeah, we need everyone.
If you've ever been born, it applies to you.
If you've ever been born, exactly. Yep. Because we know now the impact that it has on babies, when you don't get, when you're not born into a supported, loving environment, and when your mum is not emotionally and physically safe and well. So yeah, it does. It impacts everybody.
All of that information that you've received from the survey and everybody that you're speaking to and the other organisations. I mean, just for the purpose of this podcast, because we're talking about risk, who do you think should define risk?
The woman. Absolutely. And yep, absolutely. Risk is subjective. You can't. I mean, guidelines are good and they're there for a reason, but you have to treat each circumstance as an individual. It's an individual woman. It's an individual baby. Just because she might have had a, PPH with a previous birth should not impact where she can choose to give birth the next time. One set of twins is not the same as another set of twins. It's subjective, and like you said, women are informed. They already are capable of and are already doing the research and declining referral if that's what they want, and birthing at home if that's what they want, even if they have category B or C conditions. And there's not, the pathways for transfer are there for a reason. If a midwife says to her client, the woman in her care, I think we should transfer to hospital, the vast majority of women will do that because of the relationship that they have with the midwife. They're not going to willingly put themselves or their baby in danger. And all of this is established, and it feels frustrating that we have to say it again and again to the government and the people making these decisions, but the way things are operating now is working for most women, and taking a step backwards from that just doesn't make any sense.
That's great. You're very right. Very true. Hadn't even thought about the fact that we're actually just doing it.
Yeah, already
and it's
doing
working.
It. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we look at that risk being weighed up by those practitioners, they are weighing it up from a statistical medical framework, whereas the women, those practitioners are not taking into account the woman's cultural background, family background, anything that's going on, anything else that builds that entire picture, which for her builds that risk profile and that belief.
Exactly.
Which is what leads to her being safe and making the choices that are safest for her. This can't just be a statistical game.
No. And, the kinds of things that are that are listed as category B and C conditions, some of them, majority of midwives said they don't believe they adequately define risk. So let's start with that. But if you have a combination of these things, or if one of these things comes up during labour, like a woman, one example we gave, the Health Minister's office when we met with them last week was many women don't want to get an ultrasound during their pregnancy. And so a midwife may be caring for a woman in labour and discover that the baby's breech or that there's two babies. What are they to do then? Are they at risk of losing their registration if they stay? And it's far too late to transfer at that point. And then there's a huge risk of injection of fear into the birth space, which we know doesn't help with outcomes. So what is their plan for those situations? Because those things will happen, and why should a woman's anxiety or depression or, an autoimmune disorder mean she can't have a birth at home? It's just not logical.
And so there's some of the things that fall into category B, right? It might be worth spelling some of those out. So things like a VBAC fall into category B, depending on the type of cesarean that the woman's had.
Yeah.
Her BMI, as you said, mental health.
Yeah, if it's an IVF pregnancy, if you're over the age of 40. Breech is also something that could be B or C, and also COVID is currently on there as a B and C condition. So who hasn't had COVID?
Do have at the point?
Yeah.
Like it has a history of having had it?
Yeah, both. So having a history is category B. Currently having it is category C.
That's 100% of my caseload right there.
Yeah.
Gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If your baby is small or large for gestational age, and we know how inaccurate ultrasounds are at, determining the size of the baby. If your pregnancy goes over 42 weeks, that's an instant category C.
Previous hemorrhage.
Yeah. Yep. And then twins is a category C. More than 5 babies is a category B. It's just, we asked the women planning a home birth in the survey, we gave a sample of category B and C conditions and just asked them, do you have any of these at the moment? And 40% said they had anxiety and depression. 25% had a previous cesarean, and we know that's a big reason why women choose home birth. Women who've had a previous cesarean don't want to end up in hospital or don't want to go to hospital where they probably end up with another. And then over 15% said they had a high BMI. So a lot of women who filled in the survey would automatically be at risk of not getting a home birth if this legislation passed.
And so, Jo, amongst your midwifery colleagues, what are the conversations around this? Like, what if this does, what if it came in? What happens? What do you do?
I think people are just reeling, to be honest. Everybody that I've spoken to everyone's kind of like, what do we do? How are we going to do this? And I guess I'm feeling positive that we're going to get through, but it's not going to be without a fight. And the midwives know that, so they'll be rallying all their women.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
they're all chomping.
Absolutely. There's so much involved. It's like anybody. Everybody brings all of their life well-lived stuff to birth, and it plays out in labour. You see it. And even practitioners. We all bring our stuff, and from my perspective, like I get to see every week women just beautifully birthing their babies in their lounge room. Whereas, for an obstetrician, they're into high-risk intervention and that's what they see time and time again. So that's their reality. And to have obstetricians, even part of writing guidelines for home birth women is ridiculous.
Even worse.
That would be like me going and writing guidelines for an obstetrician. I wouldn't have a clue.
That's right.
Yeah,
and GPs as well, who aren't even in the birth space, writing submissions, and the college writing submissions to this consultation. I'm sorry, but stay in your lane. This is not like you said before, like the women who are home birthing and the midwives providing their care are the key stakeholders here. Anything else, anyone else is outside of the scope or should be outside of the scope of this whole consultation process. Otherwise, home birth with a private midwife is going to be as restrictive as publicly funded home birth. And no one wants that.
What would be the point? We may as well all just go and work in the system and get our super and holiday pay and weekends off, and anyway.
Yeah.
Let's go. Well, I'd actually just really like to thank you, Kristyn, for, you and your team, but particularly you, because I know, I've been there. I do really understand the 24/7 role of when there's something like this happening, and in your role as the convener of Homebirth Australia, I know it's a full-time job and it's voluntary. And thank you, because, without you and your organisation, we wouldn't be able to even have this conversation and nothing would be changing. So, it's a lot, and it's not going unnoticed.
Thank you.
Put it that way.
Thanks, Jo. It's hard, but there's a lot of pressure. I have to say, and this is the difference. Going back to what you said at the start, I would never presume to speak on behalf of all home birthers or any midwife, and that's why we did the survey. And that's why we've been using that in every single meeting as this is what we want. And everything aligns. It was really, I actually cried when I read the ACM submission to the consultation, because I was a bit anxious about what it was going to say. Is it going to say the same thing that the women want? And it did. So I'm hopeful as well. I'm optimistic, because it does feel like everyone who has a stake in this is asking for the same thing. And how could they ignore that? How can they ignore all those thousands of voices saying the same thing with such passion? But yeah, we know better than anyone in the maternity advocacy space that you can't take your foot off. Like Elaine said, you have to keep going and keep them nervous because otherwise it'll be gone. That we're up against the medicalized side of birth, who of course want every woman in hospital and want control over women's bodies, and we just have to remember that's what we're up against.
Good old patriarchy. So let's end off with the question that we're obviously asking everyone, which is the same from the film. So what do you think it would take for all women to emerge from their births physically well and emotionally safe?
Choice. They should be able to freely choose without finances being an issue, location being an issue, any other factors, any health conditions being an issue. They should be able to choose where they have their babies and who provides their care. And I think if they did, it wouldn't matter whether these women are having their babies in hospital or at home. The outcomes would be better because they have full control over the experience and every decision that's made.
Round of applause.
And Kristyn, before you go, just quickly, the Homebirth Australia conference is coming up in November, 9th to the 11th of November on the Sunshine Coast, right?
It is, yep, and we're really excited about it. It has taken a backseat in my mind with all this stuff going on, but we've got an awesome team working on it. We've got you guys coming along. Jo's going to speak and Jerusha's going to be our MC again. We've got a new addition to the lineup as well this year with our community day, because we wanted there to be something for families and not just the birth workers. The conference has always been for everybody, but we made this community day smaller, bite-sized, sort of like an exhibition style event where families can come and meet local birth workers or just learn about anything pregnancy, birth, postpartum and home birth. And, no need to book in advance, no need to stay the whole day. You just come and go, and kids are welcome. So we've got workshops as well, all the usual stuff that comes with our conference, the dinner. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. It's good to have an opportunity to let your hair down and just feel the love of the home birth community in amongst all this fighting for our rights.
It's exactly what we need. Jo and I are coming on a road trip.
Oh, nice.
Going to be great. I can't wait.
Yeah.
I think the home birth conference dinner, that it's about 10th of a nanosecond before people are up and dancing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the best dance floor in town.
I have to say, last year was my first in-person conference because we had a bit of a break of no conferences during COVID, and I was surprised by the speed in which people jumped up and started dancing. The lights hadn't even gone off yet.
It escalates.
It was great.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a really great conversation. We really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for all you do, Kristyn.
Thank you.
You're amazing.
So are you guys.
And that's a wrap. You can check out the show notes to find websites, books, research articles, social media handles, and general information about each of our podcast guests. Thank you to our fabulous Birth Time sisters, Zoe Naylor and Selena Scoble, for supporting the creation of this podcast behind the scenes. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to Birth Time the podcast. Leave us a review and a rating, and please, we'd really love it if you'd share it amongst your friends and networks. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Birthtime World, and our website birthtime.world, where you can also stream and watch our international award-winning film, Birthtime the Documentary. You can find out more about me, Jo Hunter, and my midwifery work at midwifejo.com.au, and more about Jerusha Sutton and her gorgeous photography and doula work at jerusha.com.au. And thank you to you, our beautiful Birthtime family, for tuning in to Birthtime the podcast. We really do appreciate you all so, so much. Until next time.